Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our St. Patty's Day party at the New York State Bridge Authority for our monthly meeting. But before we do that, we have our audit and finance committees that we're going to be acting together, voting on some resolutions. And with that, we will have our chairman, Mr. Dressel, if you would take, as our finance chairperson, take control of the minutes.
I talked to Roger Higgins on the audit, and it's a combination meeting, so Roger is going to open the meeting.
Okay.
But he'll approve the minutes and so forth. We'll get it done all in one.
Commissioner Higgins?
Okay, thank you. Can we have a motion to adopt the minutes of the December 17th Audit Committee meeting?
So moved.
Second? Second by Joe. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? And a motion to adopt the minutes of the December 17th Finance Committee meeting.
Just for the record, Commissioner Romali is here. This is the Committee of the Whole. He's here joining us by Skype. Just wanted the record to reflect that.
I was going to say that before we introduce all the commissioners, but
You're acting as the Committee of the Whole. So
gotcha. All right. So here again, Joseph, welcome. You're being Skyped in. Your audio and visual is all on camera. So.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. All right, so the minutes are adopted. We go to a review of the Koski Annual Report, and I'll turn it over to Brian for necessary introductions and so on and so forth.
With us today we have Tim Thomas from Koski & Company, our financial statement auditor, and he's going to go through with you both the report to the board, a letter, as well as the annual report prepared for external reporting each year. Tim?
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to come down and speak with you all. To us, this is a really important responsibility because even though the vast majority of our interactions are through Brian, we are engaged by and reportable and accountable to you as the people that are charged with the governance of the authority. And what you charged us with was performing an audit of the financial statements of the authority, and what you have before you is our report. Now, the fact that it is about 3/8 of an inch thick should not suggest that we had 3/8 of an inch worth of problems, and we'll go through that and address everything that's there. The first thing that you come to in our report after the table of contents is our independent auditor's report. And this independent auditor's report, it's designed to explain what it is we're doing. And the first paragraph says it's a report on the financial statements, and we're providing an audit of the financial statements of the Bridge Authority, which are your basic financial statements. And the next paragraph says that they're your responsibility. That means they're your numbers. The next series of paragraphs say what our responsibility is. It's to express an opinion on those financial statements. Now, when we express an opinion, it's really important that you know that we get to the point where we say that the financial statements present fairly your financial position. We don't say exactly. That's because there's estimates and assumptions that we make that with the benefit somewhere down the road, the clarity of perfect 20/20 hindsight might prove to be to the penny not exactly correct. However, we feel that based on the results of the work that we performed, that there's nothing that, when the dust settles and we could count all the beans, would be appreciably different than what's here that would cause anybody to change their mind about the authority. And that's what we say at the top of the next page. That's our opinion, that your financial statements do present fairly. There was a point in time in our profession where we ran away from any responsibility whatsoever with respect to fraud. And then Enron and WorldCom and Tyco and all those guys had fraud, and the auditors found out in those cases that no matter how hard they ran away from it, they couldn't get away from it. So because we were being de facto assumed to have that responsibility, we have, because you're a governmental agency and subject to governmental auditing standards, we have the responsibility to look for fraud and to report to you if we find it. Not only fraud, but they extend the concept to bias and abuse. And if we had seen any of that, we would certainly call it to your attention. We didn't see any fraud. Abuse, that sounds like a funny word. What could that possibly mean? Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that and you don't, but that the authority provided Brian with an authority-owned vehicle for his personal use. Perhaps a Chevrolet would be appropriate, but a Ferrari may be indicative of abuse, or a Mercedes or a Lexus or something like that. In some instances, that might be considered to be abuse or even bias. And what that means is sometimes you have to make judgments and estimates. And sometimes we find that all those judgments and estimates all lean the same way. So that individually, they don't result in anything that's a misstatement, but collectively, they can paint a different picture. We look for that to happen. That didn't go on here either. You'll see that there's an other matters paragraph, and what that references is during the course of the current year, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board required the implementation of 2 pronouncements. We number them so we can charge extra. GASB 68 and 71. Basically, what it boils down to is your employees, you as an employer, a participating employer, are in a pool of other state employers in the New York State Employees Retirement System. It's a defined benefit plan. And what they do is they come up with an actuarial valuation as to what all the benefits are that are going to be paid out to all the employees when they retire. And as you know, they come up with a rate and they charge you with a contribution on an annual basis, which prior to this year, you reported on a pay-as-you-go basis. Well, in New York State, that plan is about 93, 94, 95% funded, somewhere in that range. So there's a little sliver that is not funded that represents a liability. And in the past, that portion of that sliver that was allocable to you as the bridge authority was never recognized in the financial statements. So starting this year, we picked up the proportionate share of the liability associated with your participation in the New York State Employees Retirement System on your financial statements. Now, I suppose one of these thoughts that you would have is, well, that's not very good. Maybe we should just get out. Well, once you're in, you're in. There's no get out. So it's an accounting recognition. It's not a cash issue. And going forward, it's probably not going to have a material effect on your income recognition in a current year or expense recognition. But the thought is it more closely matches what goes on, because the New York State Comptroller is the sole trustee of the Employees Retirement System, and he can set the rates wherever he wants, which could cause the percent funded, the funded portion of the plan to go up or down. That matters because in a state like Illinois, they have hardly any funding for their pension plan. So the slice that would be allocable to you would be much larger, and that liability would be much larger, and it would be a more significant effect. We lost him.
Greg, we just lost Mr. Malia.
There's some required supplementary. Do you want me to wait till he comes
Yeah,
back?
we don't have a quorum right now. We're going to leave the whole without a quorum.
He's still on the screen here.
Tim, what page you on?
I am on page 2. And then we're gonna,
Yeah, why don't you continue? That's true.
Yeah, we continue this, we're not taking an action right now, and when Joe comes back, we'll take an action. And he has the papers in front of him, I'm sure he's pretty well versed in this, he read it.
okay. All right, so that's the only new thing that we have from last year. There's some additional supplemental information that gives trend information. We'll look at that in a few minutes. And then we mentioned at the bottom other legal and regulatory requirements. You are subject to generally accepted governmental auditing standards in addition to regular auditing standards, and that's like another pancake that goes on the stack. And we reference that opinion. And then, because you're a state agency, there's also some requirements that you have to follow with respect to cash and investments, and we address those in another opinion that we reference in the final paragraph. Our opinion is followed by management's discussion and analysis, and that is basically the theory of management's discussion and analysis is it's kind of like an executive summary. The Reader's Digest, abridged version of your financial statements. It's designed to have a brief discussion about where you are financially, how you got there, and then round it out by what's coming and where you're going. And that, I think, is a really... Brian put this together, and it does provide a very good, high-level synopsis of where you're at. Page 8 is your statement of net position. In the government world, we refer to that as a statement of net position. It's a balance sheet. Okay? The top are the assets. That's what you own. In the middle are the liabilities. That's what you owe for what you own. And at the bottom is your net position, which is your equity, and that's how much of it that you actually own that's not mortgaged. You got a lot of cash and cash equivalents on hand, quite a bit of investments, down from last year, which makes sense. You would expect that because if you remember, you go out and issue a bond to finance rehabilitation expenses, which you then expend till those proceeds are gone, and then you do another bond issue and embark on a new project. 2015, you kind of came to the end of that. So the fact that your investments went down from $75 million to $58 million is not a big deal. It's planned. You're right on where you thought your plan was going to be. Now, when you look under non-current assets, you'll see that the amount that you carry for bridge system hasn't changed. That's because you account for your bridges on what they call the modified approach. And that means that you maintain your bridges at a certain level, and the cost of maintenance becomes an annual expense instead of something that gets capitalized and depreciated. For you, it's probably a better way because it helps you to, in a sense, manage your operations based upon your cash requirements. Your liabilities are down a little bit. Predominantly, it's related to the contracts payable, and that's related to 2015. You're being appreciably done with the renovations. Last year, you had $3.5 million in there, and that's because you were in the midst of a big rehab project, and there was a lot of work going on. At the end of 15, there wasn't really any. The new number on there, the deferred outflows for pensions, is the $1,952,000. That relates to the new pension accounting. And I can explain it, but I can't justify why it's right or wrong. What happens is the liability, which we show the net pension liability, the $1,200,000 at the bottom, or in the debt, represents your slice of the pension obligation for your retirees. The deferred outflows of resources, the $1,000,009, there's two pieces in there. The first piece is every year when they do an actuarial evaluation, they use guesses. And then when they do revaluations, they have actual numbers. And the differences between the guesses and the actual numbers wind up being smoothed out over a number of years. And the word they use is amortized. So they've instructed us to set those up as deferred outflows of resources. Now, here's where it gets kind of strange a little bit. The liability for the pension is required to be reported as of the measurement date. The state has a March 31st year end. Every year, they do an actuarial valuation of the employee's retirement system. There will be one done in March of 2016. It's probably not going to be out and distributed to you for your use until August or September-ish. So we have to use last year's valuation date, which is March 31st, 2015. So that liability, that $1,288,000, is the liability as of that date. That reason the deferred outflows is such a big number is because the pension system contribution period runs April 1st to March 31st. They give you a discount, an appreciable discount, wouldn't you say, Brian, if you pay it in December?
Yes.
And it's a no-brainer. When you have the cash, it's a no-brainer to make that payment in December. But the problem is, that payment was after that March 31st measurement date. So the requirements call for us to set it up as a deferred outflow of resources. And basically that gets recognized as an expense next year. It sounds convoluted, it sounds crazy. They didn't. I guess they did ask us, because they sent out an exposure draft and said, what does everybody think about it? But they didn't listen to us anyways. And that's the accounting. Bottom line is when you look at 2014, you had zero there. When you look at 2015, there's $1.9 million. When 2016 comes in and replaces 14, that number is going to be constant. In terms of cash in or out, nothing really changed. All we're doing is changing the way that we're accounting for that cash flowing through the next page, which we'll go to now, which is the statement of revenue, expenses, and changes in net position. Again, to me, this will always be an income statement, and this kind of shows what happened, what went in and out. And I think the thing that we need to look at here to try to put it in perspective is, if you look at the almost all the way down at the bottom, it says decrease in net position. That's in effect the net loss, and it was $32 million last year in 14 and $10 million in 15. Well, the first thing you would think to yourself is, as a board, we did a really crummy job of stewardship if we're not making any money. Well, here's the thing. You're using the modified approach. So if we look under the expenses, you'll see maintenance and repairs, and it's really easy to see because it's the biggest number on the page after revenues. And in 2015, it was $36 million. In 2014, it was $56 million. We're paying for that out of bonds. So you're going to have, when you have a big rehab project, you're going to have years where you lose money, and then you're going to have years when you don't, when you're not doing substantial rehabilitation on your bridges. So I think it's kind of important to, in as much as possible, disregard those numbers and look at the rest of what's going on these pages. And I think the things that you're going to see is revenues maintained themselves, went up a little bit. Salaries went down. There's two reasons for that. You looked at your staffing, and in 2014 you had some settlements that you paid out, so that went up a little bit. You have Easy Pass on your bridges, so your revenue can go up, and your cost of toll collectors doesn't have to necessarily go up the same way. And in fact, you'll see that electronic toll costs, which are the per transaction fees that you pay for the people using the Easy Pass, went up from 3.9 million to just 4.1. So that makes it easy to see why the revenue could go up and the salaries go down. The benefits stayed fairly flat on a year-by-year basis.
And that was partially as a result of the treatment from GASB 71. If you look at going back to the statements of net position, the $1,952,000 is in effect the December payment that we made on the pension system. So it pulls from the operating statement the proportional share from 2015 off of the statements of revenue and expenses and changes in that position and places it on what is in effect the balance sheet. So that's really a significant driver as to why employee benefits stayed flat year over year. Other than that, the only real big change in the statements of revenue, expenses, and changes in that position is, of course, the rehabilitation, reconstruction, and bridge repairs. That is a direct result of the winding down of the project at Newburgh. Overall, though, everything was materially in line with prior year.
And that was a pretty good guess, because when you did close out that Newburgh project, it was pretty close to what you budgeted.
It was very close to what we budgeted. It was within, I think, a fraction of 1%.
Now, one thing that
Before you go any further, Commissioner Romaglia is back online, being present, so he can hear everything we're saying. Secondly, we're pretty fortunate, like you said, to pay this pension out of cash money. A lot of municipalities and other agencies don't have that, and actually the state is funding them into their budget, which is a little costly, as you
Yes.
mentioned earlier.
Yes, it is. You pay a premium and then you pay interest on the
That's
money.
correct.
Now, one of the remarkable things that doesn't look like it, but it really is under non-operating revenues. In 2014, you had about $390,000 worth of interest income, and in 2015, you had $446,000. Okay, so what? Why is that remarkable? It's really interesting. The big banks don't want governmental entities' money because you are required, or they are required, to collateralize anything that they hold of yours in excess of the $250,000 FDIC insured amounts, and that costs them money. And a lot of banks, I actually went to a presentation where it was explained that J.P. Morgan Chase actually chased away $2 billion worth of deposits. Apparently, bottom line, addition by subtraction, because it cost them too much money to maintain those kind of
Penalized
deposits.
for
Yes.
They're penalized now for going holding government.
very short amount.
Yes. Now we've all read in the news about the negative interest rates in Europe, and they haven't had negative interest rates here. But in effect, the banks are kind of trying to get there by hammering governmental units with fees, because they have to set aside U.S. Treasuries or state or school district obligations to collateralize your money, so that in the event that they fail, you get made whole. You're not seeing that, and you're still fortunate in that respect. I would just say that going forward, and Brian's already way all over that's something that you really want to look closely
In
at.
effect, the interest income went up year over year despite the amount of available investable proceeds from the bond issue going down solely, but primarily because of both investment horizon and interest rates have rebounded a bit from the lows that they were back in 2012. So that's what's really driving it. Overall, though, it really wasn't that much of an increase, but when you consider it in the context of the $37 million that we paid on the projects, it was a big chunk of our available investable assets that drove that increase. So in that regard, it is favorable. Overall, again, though, if you look, the decrease in that position is driven primarily from the change in rehabilitation, reconstruction, and bridge repairs. And that's really the main driver for us. We do everything on what's almost a cyclical basis, where we see a toll schedule revision, a subsequent borrowing, and then a series of payments to go and consume the proceeds of the borrowing to do repairs on the bridge. And we're comfortably at a point right now where we've consumed all of the debt proceeds in 2015, and we're still in a comfortable position in the maintenance reserve fund to be able to continue to do maintenance and still leave a few years left on the existing toll schedule life.
There's also, too, with the banks, and you mentioned before, there's vehicles that the banks could invest in through the federal government, if I'm not mistaken, that they don't have to collateralize over $250,000 per fund. It's already collateralized. You pay a little bit extra, but you also have some extra money, too. That's available to some banks.
Right. We spoke about the adoption of the change in the accounting for the pension plan, and under net position, you'll see that there's a restatement, and the net effect for the Bridge Authority was a reduction in equity, opening equity of $40,000 as a result of that adoption, which really, at the end of the day, is pretty meaningless when you look at a $41 million equity. In entities where you're a little bit more capital or labor intensive, like some of the towns and counties, that number is probably going to be significantly larger, both in dollars and as a percentage of the available equity, and is a bigger deal. The question that obviously begs asking right at this point in time is, okay, so now we're sitting there, our equity went from $52 million to $41 million. Are we okay? And the answer is yeah, everything's okay. You're where you planned to be. And by virtue of the nature in which you finance the bridge repairs and recognize the expenses related to them, you're right on plan. So there's no negative takeaway from that. The next page is the statement of cash flows. And the big deal there always is the cash from operating activities. In your particular case, this gets skewed a little bit because the payments to contractors, that represents substantially the cash that went out the door for the bridge improvements. And that's, as long as those numbers are bigger than the net change in cash used by operations, again, things are okay. And you can see that in 14, the cash that went out for contractors was $58.5 million, and it resulted in a $26 million use of operating cash. And in this year, $40 million went out, and it resulted in only a $6 million use of operating cash. That's fine. And that money came from invested funds, which was borrowings that you had made and then tucked away to pay for that. So at the end of the day, your cash over the 2-year period, at the beginning of 14, it was $11,600,000. At the end of 2015, it was $11,500,000. Bottom line, what that really tells you is, when it comes to plan, again, you're right where you thought you were going to be. So that goes right back to the question, is everything okay? And I guess the answer is that is really simply yes, it is. That's followed by the notes to the financial statements. And basically, this isn't where we take poetic license to exercise our vast literary talents and put a whole bunch of stuff in there. The things that are in here are required disclosures. They're there because there's different options in the way you can account for things. And where there are choices, this section of the financial statements tells the reader about what those choices are and the choices that you made. And in all situations where you had the opportunity to choose as to how you were going to do something, we feel that the choice that you made was the most appropriate choice. And was it not, we would tell you that. So that's important to know. I'm not purposely trying to get through here to sneak by anything that is significant. But if there were something really important there, I would call your attention to it. Behind that, when we get to like page 33, we start some required supplementary information. Because you account for your infrastructure, that's the bridges, using the modified approach, you basically agree that you're going to maintain your bridges at a Category 5, and you pay an engineering firm to come in every year and determine that you have in fact done that. And this schedule is required to update the status as to where you are with respect to all those bridges, and you had in fact done that. And so you may fail to qualify for that accounting treatment were your bridges to deteriorate to a 3 or a 2 or a 1. And they haven't. You are maintaining your bridges at an appropriate level so that they will theoretically last. And that is what we address on 33 and 34. Page 35 is where we talk about the other post-employment benefits. That's the health insurance, the promise that you've made to your employees to provide health insurance from the day they retire to the day they die. And we recognize a liability for the little incremental piece of that they earn, because if, for example, if an employee starts here at age 22 and works till age 62 and retires, the IRS pretty much figures that we're going to live to within 6 months of 83, one way or the other. I don't know exactly how actuaries do that, but
I think it was 85 last year.
somewhere in there. But so let's just say that it's going to be 85. So that means 23 years worth of benefits that an employee is going to get. They earn that over the in this particular example, the 40 years that they work here. So this accounts for what that is, and I think it's important just to know that there's a liability out there. The next 2 pages deal with the pension plan and their required schedules. Basically, on page 36, your percentage of the pension liability for the employee's retirement system is 0.038%. And the pension plan, I guess, this year is funded at 98% almost. And that's what it tells us on that page. And then the next page gives us a 5-year history of what the contractually required contributions are and the covered payroll. And I think the thing that's really interesting to look at on there is in 2011, your covered payroll was $9.1 million, and in 2015, your covered payroll was 9.8. That's not a big increase. You can see that the employees' retirement system expense has gone up and down over those periods. Now it's trending back downward again, and I believe next year's is going to trend down a little bit more. They were saying that.
Unless the market tanks.
Unless the market really tanks, exactly. Page 38. That is not us stuttering. I mentioned that we are, because you're a government, we are required to consider generally accepted governmental auditing standards, and those require us to look at 2 things: internal control over financial reporting and internal control over compliance with laws and regulations and stuff like that. And this is the findings stuff. These are the gotcha pages, if you want to call them that. And if we had any problem with your internal controls or your compliance, this is where we would be telling you. Now, internal controls, that's the fancy word for the checks and balances that you have put in place, the policies and procedures to make sure that the assets of the authority are protected from loss, and that they're accounted for and handled in a manner in which you intend for them to be. And we look at that stuff, and if we felt that there was some significant gaps there, this is where we would tell you there aren't any. The next page, compliance and other matters. Okay, what's that mean? In this particular case, sometimes there are like you have to collateralize your cash. New York State requires that, and there's some investment policies. Those are some provisions of laws, regulations, contracts, or grants that we might take exception with here. The one thing you don't see in here again this year that we didn't have last year is any reference to federal funds. That Single Audit Act is what they call it, and when you receive, for 2015, the threshold was $750,000 in federal money, you're required to have a single audit. And basically, that means there's extended procedures that we apply to the government money so that you can provide assurances to the grantors that you spent the money that they granted you the way they intended you to spend it and don't have to give it back. For each of the last 2 years, you haven't received enough federal money to trigger that type of an examination, so we haven't performed it.
Last time we did that was when we had money for the camera projects. And
It's the multiple, it was the 2 grants for the
Right.
camera projects that occurred in 13 and 14.
They shared projects with it. The government shared the
Right,
project.
we got the funding, so therefore we had a mini audits, if you will. verifying we did what we said we would do with the money.
And since then, the threshold that would trigger that went from 500,000 to 750,000. So the chances of that coming up again, unless you got a big federal highway project grant, are probably pretty slim. The next page is investment program compliance, and that's a report for New York State that provides, because you're a public authority, provides them with assurance that you did what you were supposed to do with your cash and investments. You also received a letter from us. It says report to the board at the top, and we get a lot of latitude in terms of what we're allowed to do and how we're allowed to do it when it comes to an audit. One of the places we don't get a lot of latitude is the communications that are contained in this document. These are required communications. We're provided, surprisingly enough, with two options. We can either communicate them to you in writing, these issues, or we can communicate them to you orally. If we choose to communicate them to you orally, we are actually required to write a memo about what we talked about and retain that memo. Now, there's absolutely no way that if I communicated this to you orally that I'd remember to write that memo and retain it. And as long as you have to do that, you might as well just write it down to begin with. So, with that being said, we made it a policy in our firm that we just communicated in writing. And there are just a number of issues that we run through. The first one is significant accounting policies. All the accounting policies, all the ways you choose to count the beans stayed the same from last year to this year, except for the way you account for pensions, which means you adopted the two new pronouncements. That's what the first paragraph says. Accounting estimates. There's some estimates that are especially sensitive. The big ones relate to receivables and pensions and other post-employment benefit obligations. And then we think that with respect to those estimates, the assumptions were appropriate. The next one relates to significant disclosures. And it's important to know that the disclosures that are in here are consistent, fair, and neutral. The next paragraph deals with difficulties encountered in performing the audit. Sometimes, in some places, we ask for things. And sometimes with really legitimate reasons, management says, no, we're not going to give it to you. That actually does happen. That's why this paragraph is in here. Had anything like that happened, or we failed to get appropriate, cooperation or whatever from Brian and his staff, this is where we would be telling you that no way that happened. Brian is very open and transparent. He gave us everything we asked for, usually before we asked for it. Corrected and uncorrected misstatements. That's in there because sometimes we'll find a journal entry someplace, and this is the place where quite frequently professional relationships turn into like little kids throwing a tantrum. Clients will not want to make a journal entry, and they will be adamant against it. And that happens more often than you think. And when that does, this required communication provides us with the mechanism to say, well, we found this difference, but we didn't adjust it. And we found that difference, but we didn't adjust it. That's not the case here. We didn't find anything like that. Disagreements with management. Sometimes there are things that we disagree about. And if we do, we would tell you here. Sometimes in some of the larger governments where they have, like for instance, a county might have an industrial development agency or a whole bunch of other entities that roll up into their financial statements. Some counties don't like the way they have to report them, and they choose to do it a different way. That could trigger a disagreement that we would have to report on. We don't have anything like that. The next one, we just tell you that we asked for certain representations from management. Basically, we prepare this long list of representations that they make. It's about 7 pages long. And at the end of the day, what it pretty much says is, we didn't lie, cheat, or steal, and if we did, we told you about it. And we gave that to Brian. He didn't have any problem. He sent it, and he gave it back to us. And then management's consultations with other independent accountants. Sometimes, and I do it, sometimes when you have a contentious issue that you want to convince your auditor to see your way, you'll go out and bring in a hired gun. And basically what what this says is, we didn't see that happened, because one of the things that's supposed to happen when that happens is if you bring in the hired gun is supposed to call us and say, are they telling me everything? And then we can say either yes or no, and they can use what we're telling them as a basis to provide them an opinion based upon the whole story and not just the story they're being told. Had something like that happen, we would be telling you. Other findings, we didn't have any. And then there is other information in the financial statements, required supplemental information. There's nothing there. There's no smoking guns. At the end of the day, no matter how thorough I try to be, there's board members always have really two significant questions. They always want to know if everything's okay and if anybody stole anything. And I would be remiss if I didn't directly address those two questions. And the answer to those two questions are, yep, everything's okay, and no one stole anything. Nothing material. I mean, did someone throw a shovel full of sand in a bucket and take it home? I don't know. They might have done that, but not material enough that it would change the financial position and condition of your authority. And I think those are two really important questions. And I think based on our audit, I'm comfortable providing those two answers.
So to sum it up,
Thank you very much, Jim.
So,
Anyone have any questions?
So it's good, right?
It's
Thank you.
We're going to need a motion to accept Toski's report. Made. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes. We have accepted Toski and Company's annual report. Next is a resolution.
there will be a resolution that will go to the board. The next item is our annual report required under Section 2800.
Yeah.
Okay, this report includes all the requirements identified in Public Authorities Law, including a report on operations and accomplishments, the financial statements, various schedules identifying assets and liabilities, debt issued. Specifically, it also requires the annual adoption or acknowledgement of the mission statement, the code of ethics, and the lobbyist policy.
And we're going to pass this resolution on to the full board.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So a motion to move it to the full board?
So moved.
Moved by Joe, second. All in favor? Aye, opposed? Then we get to the review of the 2015 Public Authorities Law Annual Investment Report.
Okay, next up is the annual investment report, also reported in the same manner as Section 2800. This includes the independent accountant's report that we had just gone through with Tim regarding the authority's investment compliance with guidelines, the authority's investment guidelines that the board will adopt annually as required under Public Authorities Law, and a statement on an investment income record and the cost of investment associated services.
And that also requires us to pass the resolution on to the full board. Motion? Joe? Moved. Rod? Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
Right.
Opposed? No one? And finally, review Tronconi's internal auditor report.
Okay, last up is a requirement under the Public Authorities Reform Act that the authority conduct or continue to have a program of internal control review. As part of our internal control review, we have Tronconi and Segara, our contract internal auditor, assist us in the development of an audit plan to go and provide assurance to management that our controls are working as designed and that the designs are adequate to accommodate adequate risk mitigation. In this particular report for the year, conducted in accordance with the audit plan previously provided to the audit committee, they had identified only one indicator. The risk of it was considered minimal, as the risk itself was more conceptual, and there were mitigating controls to go and address anything that could have come of it. No specific issues were identified. The issue itself was there was an inappropriate access given to a vendor master record, but due to other mitigating controls, there was no issue identified that would have been considered a breach of internal controls or a loss. In the meantime, we have created an incremental control to go and mitigate the risk further, and we will have a more permanent fix as we improve some of the authorizations within the J.D. Edwards system, and we'll report on that back to the Audit Committee later this year.
We need a motion to accept the internal auditor report. Moved by Joe.
Second.
Second by Rod. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Is there any other business to come before the committee of the whole? Seeing none, motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All in favor, being adjourned. Mr. Chairman, back to you.
Thank you. Did a great job. Let's move for our March 17th monthly board meeting. Before we do that, I'd like to make some introductions to our commissioner on my left here, Mr. Rod Dressel. To my left here, Deputy Executive Director Tara Sullivan. We have Commissioner Mr. Higgins. We have Commissioner who is Skyping in, Mr. Joe Romaglia. We also have our counsel, Chris Shaw, I'm sorry. And we have our Executive Director, Mr. Joseph Ruggiero, who just stepped out. And also we have some of our department heads sitting around the room. And saying all that, let's start with our administration. Oh, I'm sorry. Motion to adopt the regular minutes of December 18th. Second. Second motion. Yeah. Second. Any discussion? If not, roll call. All in favor, say aye. I introduced you, but now you're physically here.
Always in my first one.
All right. Mr. Russo.
Yes, good afternoon. I have several items under administration. The first three of those items are all related to public authorities law and requirements where we're to review and submit reports to various chairs of committees in Albany and to file with the comptroller through the Public Authorities Reporting and Information System. So I'll go through each of them and hit the highlights. I know you have them in the packet, so I'll just touch on the highlights. The first one is the annual prompt payment report for 2015. This is a report, and together with the report, the guidelines are submitted that govern that report on our prompt payments over the last year. And as you can see on the report, we did have two reportable late payments to two vendors that occurred outside of the normal payment cycle. And so we've noted them on the report, and we've attached the guidelines that govern our procurement, our prompt payment rather, and we have a resolution behind them for you to accept that report and allow me to submit it.
So moved. Second. Any other discussion? If not, roll call. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
The next report is an annual report on our list of real property and a report of disposals. We are required to report any disposals that had a fair market value in excess of $5,000, and through public auction, you'll see on the attached report that we did have two vehicles that hit that threshold, and so we've included them on the report. And in addition to that, we also, again, submit the disposal guidelines, and as part of those guidelines, you're asked to, included in the resolution, to designate a contracting officer for the purposes of disposals, and typically that has been my title, Director of Administrative Services, and so that's included in the accompanying resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Roll call. All in favor, say aye.
And that's, you're approving two resolutions there.
Both resolutions.
One for the report. Okay.
Actually, should we take them separately?
Yes, please.
All right, so let's go back. The first vote was on the first resolution, the Public Authority Accountable Act of 2005. Moved by Commissioner Higgins, second by
Rod.
Mr. Dressel. Discussion? Not roll call. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And the other one is, if I have both the same ones.
Did
Everyone?
yeah.
All right, so
The other one is under Title 5A. I'm reading it.
all right, so the second one is on the requirements of Article 9, Title 5A. of the-
One you're designating the Director of Administrative Services, the contracting officer, and the second one, you're authorizing the submission of the report.
Right.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
discussion, roll call, on favor, say aye. Robert?
The next item is our annual procurement report for 2015. Similarly, this has two resolutions. One associated with the guidelines themselves, which annually the board has to review its procurement guidelines and readopt them. And then the second resolution is for the report itself. The report requires us to list expenditures or contracts, procurements greater than or equal to $5,000 that occurred over the year, or that were carried over from prior years that were still active. And so we've created that listing. There are, based on the types of contract awards, there's different information that's reported on those line items. That's why you see some blanks in certain fields. The guidelines themselves, this year we do have a change, and if you looked at the guidelines, you would have noticed a new section, or new inserted section 6 in red. And this was to add a section on a provision for the service-disabled veteran-owned business enterprise utilization, similar to the Article 15A MWBE program. There's now an executive law, Article 17B, that provides for agencies and authorities to promote and assist participation by service-disabled veteran-owned businesses on procurement contracts. And a lot of the language has been mirrored off of the MWBE program. And whereas the MWBE program provides for a 30% goal on those procurements, the SDVOB provides for a 6% goal. So this is not included in the MWBE program. This is in addition to. So this is an additional 6% goal that we now have to include in our procurements. And so we've had Council's office add the pertinent language there. And we've also included in it under section 6.01C, similar to what we did with the MWE program, we put in a 10% variance on procurements that are less than the utilization requires, the 25,000 and 100,000 threshold on construction contracts. For those smaller procurements, we're allowing a competitive advantage of a 10% variance where an SDVOB comes in and proposes. We're recommending that to you as part of this addition to the guidelines. So that is the substantive difference or change to the guidelines that you would be adopting. And so, together with the report, I ask you to consider both those resolutions.
All right, Rob?
Individually or together?
Together? All right.
Move the resolutions.
Well, basically, we need to bundle officially in order to approve.
Well, the guideline resolution and the procurement resolution, correct? Yep.
Does it need a motion to bundle? To make a bundle?
Move to consider both resolutions at the same time.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Now on the resolutions themselves.
So moved.
We got to move it first. We got to make another motion to move your bundle. So moved. All right.
Second.
Any discussion? If not, roll call, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should have just taken them separately.
We should just vote it separately. Voted twice.
Unfortunately, I have to do it.
Okay. Item D, our IBTTA annual membership for 2016. We received our invoice for our renewal membership in the International Bridge, Tunnel, and Turnpike Association. It's based off of our total revenue from the prior year for 2015, and the amount of the dues for this year would be $24,667. It's a slight increase of $143 over last year, and there's a resolution there for you to authorize that payment.
So moved.
Second. Discussion. All in
Do
favor,
we
say aye.
make use of do we have people going to these
We don't,
meetings, the annual meetings?
they still represent us and lobby, and they work on, national policy. One of the things they've been tasked with by Congress is to develop an international, a nationwide toll interoperability policy. So our involvement is critical in that.
And we do receive all of their publications and all the access to all of the conferences that they do have. They post up all of the videos and literature that come out of those conferences. So we do. Each of the department heads can access all
Do
that.
we get, I'm not against belonging to it, but I know years ago, I think I went to a couple of these meetings, and there's some pretty good information
Yeah.
and kick out, which especially the management here, I would think would be valuable.
Yeah, you're right. It's a great information sharing resource for us.
Recently, some of the destinations have been excessive in terms of travel, like Hawaii and stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to.
Well, if they have one of these in Hawaii, who's an excellent candidate?
I did.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, roll call. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Next, Robert.
Item E, the Easy Pass Interagency Group Service Corporation. The Easy Pass Interagency Group is seeking to create a parallel a service corporation to be able to conduct some of its ordinary business that it otherwise cannot do now in its current form. The interagency group is essentially an association of members now that conduct its business through the goodwill and the offering of host member agencies. So, for instance, our staff that work for the IAG are currently employees of other, or at least their payroll is hosted by other entities, public entities, Pennsylvania Turnpike and Maryland specifically. Most or all of the contracts that the group holds collectively are held by one of the entities, like MTA Bridges and Tunnels and so forth. So there really is no legal entity to conduct business. So over the years, the members have wished to create a corporation and to, in fact, transform the entire IAG into a corporation. And there's been a tremendous amount of dialogue over many years, with a lot of pushback from some of the members against doing that for a variety of reasons. And what has happened over the last year is that we've come to an agreement that we at least need some form of an entity, of a corporation, that can do some of this, at least on an administrative level. And push kind of came to shove at the end of last year when one of the entities that's hosting the employees said that we no longer wish to do that. And no other member agency stepped up to take that role on. And we assume it's for good reasons for that entity. They want to pay into retirement systems and provide benefits that are truly not their employees. So we agreed to create a service corporation. Chris Shaw is on the legal committee and has spent countless hours working with that committee to come up with a set of documents and a thoughtful way of creating an entity in this form of a service corp that will allow us to do that and still maintain the control that we as members of the interagency group have over the entire organization. So we will still vote and have membership and do everything that we do as an IAG, and that portion of the administrative duties that we're going to turn over to the service corp, of which we will all be members. We will be the board of directors. that portion that will come out of our interagency group budget will be moved over to the Service Corp, and the funding will come from the IAG. In other words, our dues will still go to the Easy Pass Interagency Group, and that portion that needs to go to the Service Corp will be funded over to them from the IAG's treasurer.
Just that part where it says it won't exceed $15,000, is that where this pertains to?
That limits the spending of the
Right.
executive director of the proposed entity. And that was,
What's this gonna cost us?
nothing.
Okay.
That's
A shell corporation.
Yeah, it's not going to cost us anything more than it costs us now. What it's going to allow us to do is to be able to conduct business without having a host agency do that. Now, the Service Corp itself, the agreement for the Service Corp will be hosted by one of the entities, and right now it's going to be MTA Bridges and Tunnels. And I'll let Chris expound on this.
Well, I think what I was saying, though, before, where the entity has to pay pensions and various other things, are we going to take that responsibility, and we're going to take it?
So we were paying that anyway
Originally.
as a part of our
Right.
obligation to pay the direct costs of these staffers. So Bob, you've looked at the financial side of this, but they're going to be engaging essentially a private payroll company and private 401k program to provide those kinds of comparable services, healthcare and that sort of thing for the employees. But the employees will not be employees of a public entity any longer. They'll be employees of this not-for-profit corporation. And the entity will be expected to carry out, managing the office, renting the Xerox machine, the kind of things that they need to do to run the office. Travel for the IAG's purposes, this is a very small staff, so they basically are working for the interests of all of the entities that are involved here. So it's 3 right now, right? The staff component.
Yeah.
How many?
And we have a
3 people. It's
and we have a
very small
vacant
staff,
position
yeah.
that we would fill.
Right.
Any other questions?
Sign the times.
So moved.
Second? Rod, second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Okay,
Thank you, Robert.
And the last item I have is this is a renewal on an existing contract we have with the workplace over at Mid-Hudson Regional Hospital, Westchester Medical Center. They deliver our occupational health services. They do our employee physicals, random drug testing, and so forth. And so we have an existing contract with them that provided for additional 1-year renewals. And so this is for this year's renewal as of May 1 at a cost not to exceed $45,000. And this is, these are as-billed services. There's a schedule of services. And I've noted in there that our current period that ends this April 30th, we had a not-to-exceed cost of $40,000, and so far through January, they billed us $22,485. So you can see we don't quite get to the not-to-exceed.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? Roll call, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Mr. Jeff?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First item on the agenda is for the General Electronic Data Processing Consultant. We advertised back in February and received 22 requests for the proposal. We received only one proposal, which was from Dr. Theodore Mankiewicz, who has been working with us for over 25 years. His hourly rates in the proposal were for $140 for the first 3 years and $150 an hour for the potential 2 1-year additional periods. We've asked the board to approve entering into an agreement with Dr. Mankiewicz at a not-to-exceed cost of $50,000.
So moved.
Second.
Questions? If not, roll call. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Second up is supplemental agreement with CAPS for fiber and PLC upgrades at the Newburgh Beacon Bridge. Last year, we advertised and awarded a 3-year contract for the authority's system-wide intelligent transportation system engineering consultant to CAPS Trafficcom USA. We'd like to issue a supplemental agreement for fiber and PLC upgrades at the Newburgh Beacon Bridge for a cost not to exceed of $487,588.
So moved.
Questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The last thing up here is for an Oracle Enterprise Database support fee. In May of last year, we replaced the original Oracle package with a new package for $62,695, and with additional annual support fees for each year thereafter. And this year's support fee is $15,760.03.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Questions? If not, roll call. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Engineering jobs in progress. The Rip Van Winkle railing and sidewalk replacement has begun. Measurements are being taken by the contractor. Shop drawings are being created with field work scheduled to begin in June. Walkway over to Hudson, railing replacement will be starting next week with the contractor Slutsky beginning to remove some of the fencing that's attached to the railing up there. Mid-Hudson Bridge, the dehumidification project has been underway. We're waiting for equipment to be delivered so that it can be installed and the project completed by the end of this summer.
Move to accept the jobs in progress report.
Second?
Second.
Questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Jeff. We're going to move this agenda around a little bit. We're going to do the executive director's report next. For the simple fact we had a conference call. He's going to be leaving very shortly. So, Joseph, can you kind of give us your reports?
Sure, very simple. You have the monthly executive expense report. I have no expenses to report on this month. I also have the February 2016 traffic and revenue analysis report. And also the February 2016 Easy Pass sales analysis report.
Any questions, any reports?
Traffic's up, huh?
We're doing well.
No questions? Thank you, Joseph. Brian? Sorry about that, Brian.
Okay, again, good afternoon. Just to run through this quickly, so the monthly investment report, there are 4 investments for the month. They're of a routine nature. They're reflected in the investment inventory report. We're sitting at a comfortable 34 point. Sorry, sitting at a comfortable 34.8 million in the maintenance reserve fund. Interest yields rose to 0.93% for the month.
Any questions? So moved, somebody?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Okay, next up is the item coming from the audit or committee of the whole earlier, the annual report required under section 2800 Public Authorities Law. I think it was thoroughly discussed at that. Yep. So moved.
Second. Any questions? Roll call. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Okay, and lastly, the 2015 annual investment report under Public Authorities Law, again, also brought forward from the committee of the whole.
So moved. Second.
Second.
Questions? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Brian, one quick question on the Bocconi and
Segura, yes.
Auditor, we don't have to approve that?
No, basically, it's the auditor's report. Both the Tosky report and the Charconia report are their reports. We accept those at the committee level. We don't really approve them because they're their reports. We send them out,
Okay.
we just acknowledge them at the committee.
Any other questions? Did we vote on this? I'm sorry. Did we vote on this one? Yes. Yes, we voted. Yeah. All right. We have no human resources, we have no information technology, no bridge operations, any presentation to the board, no old business, new business, attorney-client privilege, no. Motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Our next meeting is April 21st at 3 o'clock.
Be back by then?
I'll be back. Don't forget St. Joseph's Day Saturday.
That's correct.
Nice job, Glenn. Thank you.
Yes. Happy St. Patty's Day today, though.
Thank you.
Stay home, everybody.
Yes.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
good, Joe.
Thank you.
They do most of their work.